I'm going to start kind of around the late 90s with what perhaps should be the immortal words of ACGT, somebody who contributed to a web forum, who wrote, "Not since the advent of 56k modems have I purchased any adult entertainment magazines." Because basically the reason that we're living in a different world now, and it's fair enough. We all know that that print is a dying art form in a sense, and so we have to find what we can salvage from that. What's good about the print environment? What that quote about adult entertainment might suggest about the online environment, and perhaps therefore open up a space for what might be signs of optimism. I'm a pessimist. I'm a pessimist, I think, ultimately, but I'm always looking around for light at the end of the tunnel. So, a starting point that I think is what makes print journalism really work is that it has. I'm going to butcher Donald Rumsfeld's little piece of philosophy. But there's writing that I know that I want. So if I'm getting a newspaper, I want the political news, I might want the foreign affairs, I might want reports from the front line of creative work. There's writing that I know that I don't want. I'm not particularly interested in celebrity gossip. I loathe the moral maze. Fashion and health columns, well, you can judge for yourself, that's probably not my main interest. There's writing I don't know but I don't want. Sometimes it's opinion piece. You start and you realise, actually, I'm not interested in this, but you might be, first of all. And there's the fourth term that he missed out in his particular set of aphorisms. There's writing that I don't know that I want. And it's that opportunity of writing about work within a broader context that gives the potential for a curious audience, an audience that, let's face it, most people who read newspapers, and this is even just those people who follow written media, and that's a small proportion of the UK population as it is. For most of those people, new music is still a marginal and a sub-marginal and a sub-sub-marginal, and there are lots of anecdotes that back that up, some of which I'm sure we'll come on to. I might have a few myself. But the fact that writing about music in this context is also in the context of, a couple of pages back, something about social affairs, something about the political party season, gives a sense that this is something that matters within that broader context. It's not something that is a conversation amongst specialists. And for all of the rest of the writing that I really like, and I guess the main point I'll make about online writing and the opportunity there is there's some really good writing, is that it tends to be a conversation amongst ourselves. So my bottom line is going to be, how do we get to a point where we can have a conversation with the wider public that is informed and does get the best of the kind of writing and the kind of creativity that comes out of writing in an online medium. General things, I suppose, about online writing, and why we go to online media. There's not just 5 sets of opinions that you can have, depending if you're just looking at the broadsheets. There are 1,000+ channels. They're usually free. You can broadcast or self-publish as well as receive. You don't just have to receive information. You can comment back on threads, or you can write your own story. You can chase the story. You don't just have to take the facts that are given to you. You can follow the link and have a listen to the music, make your own opinion. The story moves. It's often multimedia. You can look at video. You can hear. You can take a link to SoundCloud and hear an example of what the music sounds like. On the other hand, in a sense referring back to that particular quote about adult entertainment, online publishing has created a world where, thanks to Twitter, everyone has their 15 characters of fame. It means that we are just largely, there is a risk that we are talking to ourselves, that we are preaching to the converted. That in a sense you can have a long review, and it's great. It's great in a sense perhaps as a performer or as a producer of work in my case, or as a composer, to have some kind of independent or feedback from somebody that you don't know, that you've not met, somebody who's thought carefully about the work that you've made, somebody who believes that the work that you've made might have an efficacy that otherwise the wider culture doesn't acknowledge. But there may only be yourself plus 2 or 3 other people that are reading it. And therein lies the problem. Okay, I'll cut to the chase about free media. And from what I understand of the metrics, the only papers that are making money at the moment are things like the Metro. Who read the Metro today while they've been in London, or the London Evening Standard this afternoon? I'd look at it. Well, not that many. But actually, they're making money. So the reason why a lot of papers are going for free is because they're receiving more advertising that way. Amongst the newspapers, many of those are beginning to generate revenues through online advertising rather than through print advertising alone. Perhaps one of the things that may come as a corollary of that is that rather than being invested in reviewing work which is also by organisations that also pay for advertising or that can also pay for the PRs to make sure that the work is represented, there is no need necessarily to follow that agenda. You can, there might be greater freedom to be able to review those things that happen in spaces as small as this, to audiences as small as this, but that might be significant or that might become significant in future. Online, you're not restricted by space in quite the same way. You can be more creative in the way in which you present work. So the question becomes how you can create a conversation with people, not just about that, but about other things. There are some examples, and the Arts Desk is an interesting one. It is the Arts Desk, so it is about the arts as a whole rather than the arts and wider culture. Another one that I like very much is Arts Journal, which is a summary of generally Anglophone news from all sorts of media around the world. CultureBot in New York, another one that is gathering together certainly what's happening in a wider community there. But perhaps the world of blogging might evolve, or perhaps naively I raised the question, could the world of blogging evolve so that those who are expert and informed and write in an interesting style about social affairs or current affairs might also join together with those who are writing about music or contemporary dance in a way that is perhaps a bit like the Huffington Post or Comment is Free on the Guardian, or those places where you can get a whole set of different extended opinions in one place. That's the kind of media that I'd hope to see evolve in the future. Whether it's paid or not, and what the implications of that are for the writers is another question.
But the virtue of the new world is conversations, sort of multilateral relationships between different kinds of writers from someone responding to different kinds of so-called experts. But the virtue is the movement and the multimedia that you can use and the many different ways different writers can collide.
The breadth of topics that are around from one channel in that sense. So rather than that you chase the information, because online reduces the amount of redundancy. If you read a newspaper, you can skip through it. I like the first page. Actually, I'm really not interested in the article on the second page. Page 5's got an advert. Skip that straight away and move on, and you just catch those bits. You catch those bits that you want. But nevertheless, you do read it front to back, and you get a sense of what's in that day's paper. If you're looking online, you're just clicking through to those particular bits that you want. You have those sections. You can just ignore the rest. In a sense, for the media to really work, what you need is a certain amount of redundancy in there. Perhaps the paradox is that to get the kind of writing that we want, or the context that I think has a real value, you have to pay for people to have opinions and write about things that you're not interested in.
That's absolutely right, yeah. I wonder how many people 40 years ago read that music review in the Daily Telegraph.
It would have been the Times on the Telegraph.
Yeah.
The Times was the real place, and it did have a devoted readership.
A devoted readership, yeah, to the music, yeah. Anyone want to respond to Ed? Rather positive view, I thought.
My fear is that I'm losing in the internet the curatorial role that editors play. So, I picked up the Times today, I've done exactly what you said, I've read through it. Read various things that I wasn't expecting to read or be interested in. And
you're hinting at curatorial things by making links and joins within the structures.
I did, as I was doing something through this, I did try to do, not very long, just a search to see whether I could find any collectives of blogs in that sense. Those that I could find tended to be local to, I don't know, a particular part of Miami Beach or things happening in one particular area rather than covering international stories in a sense. An arts journal I'm particularly impressed by, I must say, as a way of coming together of things I didn't know that I would be interested in. Certainly, again, that is just really the arts, although they do have an ideas section. Who gets arts journal here?
You're in the right place.
Yeah. No, nobody else.
I mean the online.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's a brilliant digest. I mean, you get, it comes once a week, and you get a digest of, I don't know, 60, 70 different stories from around the world, I'd say mainly Anglophone. So you get a sense of what significant productions have been around, different types of writing about music, coming from, I don't know, Wired magazine, not the Wires in this case, but Wired magazine through to Western Daily Press in Australia, but you get a broad sense of kind of what's it's like a dipping into the zeitgeist. It's too much information. You skim a lot, but nevertheless, there is a curatorial element that comes in there, and the ideas section tends. I think the editor clearly has something about neuroscience and that aspect, about some aspects of philosophy as well. Actually, all these popular writing about philosophy and free will and those kind of things come into it. That's the best example I've found at the moment. I don't know exactly how it makes its money, or if it does make its money at the moment, but it's got several 100,000 in circulation.
I think that's a really important category that Ed has picked on there, because that seems to me a key argument against populism. The idea that public service broadcasting and so on are outdated and you should just give the public what they want. The public don't always know what they want. And I don't, people will say, I don't always know what I want, and so maybe I could do with some help in working out what I want. And that's not elitism, that's, well, you can call it, you can call it elitism if you like, but...
You can call it education as well.
Education,
which Lord Reed would have liked.
Another terrible old-fashioned word.
Do you feel that the principle, a bit like John's saying, when you tend to go to things or write about things, it's things that you've not seen or been to before? Because I think there's quite an honesty about that, of being both informed and having a certain amount of expertise in what you write about, but also making yourself vulnerable in your own judgment that you're making, and then therefore inviting readers to, in a sense, share that journey and that vulnerability with you.
Something that's maybe too obvious but hasn't really been said, which is that there's, between these sort of subjective and objective poles which have been laid out, there's a very important issue about shared cultural assumptions and the extent to which shared cultural assumptions and backgrounds are possible now. One of the reasons that this possible golden age of criticism where everyone read the Times has been lost is that at that time it was a lot of all white, mostly male critics writing for an audience whose notion of culture and notion of what they want from culture was to some extent shared. So actually, even if there might be individual disagreements about certain things.
Very, very good point. There was a very clear consensus then, and it's completely gone now. And there was a consensus amongst a small segment of society also. So one can't lament that having gone. Sure.
So who does the writer write for now?
I don't know. I do want to work somehow back around to this idea that you might be addressing people who didn't, who aren't already interested in what you're writing about, and also that you might write about something that's not only what you're interested in. I think it's very important for the critic to be confronted with things. It's one way actually to answer the question from over there before. It's one way that the critic cannot just be a single subjective person expressing a single subjective opinion, is by doing what listeners who aren't critics don't usually do, which is to engage with something that's not to their taste. But I think it's very important for me to pitch what I write in such a way as to be accessible to people who are not already existing within the field that I'm writing in.
Actually, Peter, that's what I meant by the phrase of curious but inhibited. It's just the sense there is an audience who would like, actually, in an ideal world, to hear new music that they haven't heard before, that they can actually enjoy and engage with. And that, in fact, there are lots of the sort of balkanisation of musical taste into different tribes of genres can actually put off the very people who might enjoy that more than the people who already wear the right clothes. So there is a tendency within mainstream media to have pop, classical, jazz, even opera is a separate thing. But actually, what we might have called opera a while ago can often be large-scale installation, audiovisual installation. It's actually a big spectacle that takes place in a big space. So, and that might attract a totally different audience, the one that thinks it knows what it's going to get at the Royal Opera House. sense.
Can I just ask John something quite specific actually about something you said? You mentioned writing about gigs that may happen in, you know, to a smaller audience than this, and having this sort of online community of readers around the world who might be interested in what you're writing about. And I think that was very, very interesting. But that strikes me as something that doesn't happen at all certainly in mainstream media writing about contemporary classical music, which is almost entirely focused on what a small number of critics, who I think are probably having PR pressure applied to them, think is the mainstream of contemporary classical music. Now, why is that able to happen in the kind of free jazz improv world you write about, but not in contemporary classical music?
I think you are very much at the mercy of particular editors you're working with, and you know, you can be very fortunate in working with people who are naturally sympathetic to something that's new. And I remember someone moaning the fact they'd moved from one paper to another, and said, now, you know, I'll have to write about Dave Brubeck again because that's the only jazz musician the editors heard of. And you know, he liked Dave Brubeck, but he'd written about Dave Brubeck 5 times before, you know, so it's very difficult to find a new way to write about that. So, and in a sense, what you want to do, I mean, even if you're writing in quite a sort of accessible area of contemporary music, you might like to write for the people who would only go to the Brubeck concert because they know what they're going to get. But if you can give someone the idea that if you go to this concert, you'll get something of equivalent enjoyment and quality and satisfaction, and you're discovering something a bit new.
Is there something here about whether you read something because of what's being written about, or whether you read something because the style of the writing is engaging? Because if editors were to trust in this wonderful utopia that I can try and describe, not being part of it, if arts editors were to trust some of their writers, as in some cases they do, or have done in the past at least, it's the writers who really capture you when you're reading, and who I want to go back and read. I mean, I'm a Guardian reader. Marina Hyde, I'll read pretty much anything Marina Hyde writes because she's such a brilliant stylist. And it doesn't really matter what she's writing about. And in the same way, if we had writers on music in the mainstream media, or broadcasters about music in the mainstream media, perhaps John Peel as an example, who can, just because of who they are and how they write, can take you on a journey, then that's got a real value. Not just because you're writing about the third time that a particular piece by George Benjamin's been performed, or.
And as you said, it's editors, first of all, who dictate what is done. But the other thing is the tyranny of the fact that we have a slot for an event, which is just stupid. If you've got 400 words, far better let the critic decide what to ventilate with that space. But unfortunately, we are, on the whole, told you will write 400 words on this thing.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to break that down by doing 2 things per review. But it's uphill work, because the paper likes its conventional notion of a review of an event.
And interestingly, I think what you were describing, the situation where the focus is on the critic, actually happens much more in art criticism, for example.
It does. And popular music criticism as well.
Yeah.
We should be drawing to an end, have a glass of wine. Any last point? One of the elephants in the room, which I almost brought up and I looked at my watch, is the idea that you have classical music, jazz, rock music. I mean, should we have music critics rather than classical music critics, jazz music critics?
Yes, please.
Yes, please.
Absolutely.
Yeah, which might you're hinting at as well.
I mean, the ghettoisation is just dreadful.
Yeah, and now it's getting more stifling, given that a lot of the world is shifting.
We haven't mentioned world music, but I mean that's a whole different kind of word.
Yeah, kind of word.
But it's actually ghettoised and given to a world music critic, which is stupid.
Yeah.
But given that the online world is in greater contrast to that, why isn't print media beginning to follow that?
Because they're very slow learners. And also because they are hidebound and they're anxious.
They're anxious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're in the last stages of entropy, though, aren't we?
If you say so.
Well, Thomas moved skillfully towards the wine there. So nobody noticing. To just say thank you very much for coming.